Baby girl finds German shepherd trapped in tree. What happened next melted hearts. What you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a moment in time that will stay with you forever. A moment that tested the strength of a child, the loyalty of a dog, and the fragile line between tragedy and triumph. This isn't fiction. It happened. And it might just change the way you see the world. Like, share, and let us know where you're watching from, because this story deserves to be heard. The storm had passed, but its anger still lingered in the quiet forest. Broken branches lay scattered across the muddy ground, their jagged edges pointing like silent reminders of nature's fury. The once mighty trees stood stripped and wounded, some leaning dangerously while others had been uprooted completely, their roots torn out of the earth. The air still smelled of wet soil and rain, and the distant rumble of thunder echoed like a memory that refused to fade. In a small clearing near the edge of those woods, life seemed untouched by the chaos. A baby girl, no more than 3 years old, played happily in her little world. Her tiny shoes left faint prints in the damp grass as she chased after the falling leaves that fluttered down like playful dancers. Her laughter, innocent and pure, cut through the heavy silence left by the storm. For her, the world was still a place of wonder, untouched by fear. But then it happened. The laughter stopped. She froze mid-step, her small head tilting slightly as if her ears had caught something the wind was trying to hide. At first, it was faint, so faint that anyone else might have ignored it. But children have a way of hearing what adults overlook. It was a sound, soft and broken, carried by the damp air. A whimper. She turned toward the forest, her wide eyes searching. Again the sound came, low, trembling, filled with pain. It wasn't the call of a bird or the creak of a branch. It was alive. Something was crying. The little girl clutched the corner of her dress nervously, her heartbeat quickening though she couldn't understand why. Step by step, she walked closer to the line of fallen trees, her shoes squelching in the wet earth. The cries grew louder, echoing from somewhere deep inside the tangle of branches and shattered trunks. Each whimper was sharper now, each one pulling her tiny feet forward. And then she saw it. A massive tree had fallen, its hollow trunk cracked open like a broken shell. From inside, the sound came again, a desperate, heart-wrenching cry. She leaned forward, peering into the darkness of the fallen giant, her breath catching in her chest. Something was inside. Something alive. Her little hands trembled as she pressed them against the rough bark. The forest was silent except for that cry, echoing like a secret begging to be heard. Was it danger waiting in the shadows? Or was it a plea for help? The girl's lips parted, but no sound came. She couldn't call out. She couldn't run away. Her eyes shimmered with both fear and compassion. Somewhere deep in her heart, she knew whatever was inside needed her. And what she discovered next would leave everyone in tears. The morning after the storm was unlike any other. The countryside had always carried its own kind of magic, but today the air felt cleaner, sharper, almost as though nature itself had washed away every speck of dust and sorrow during the night. The sun rose slowly, spilling golden light across the fields, where dew clung to each blade of grass like tiny diamonds waiting to be discovered. A soft mist lingered low, hovering over the meadows, before curling away into the warmth of the morning breeze. The trees, though battered, stood proud. Their leaves glistened with raindrops that caught the sunlight, shimmering like jewels. Birds began to return, their songs filling the quiet with melodies of survival and hope. The wind whispered gently through the branches, bending them but never breaking their spirit. It was the kind of morning that made the world feel alive again, as if promising that no storm, no matter how fierce, could take away its beauty forever. In a small wooden house at the edge of those fields lived a baby girl with cheeks rosy from the cold and eyes as wide as the endless sky. Barely 3 years old, she had a spirit unburdened by fear, a curiosity that carried her wherever her tiny feet would allow. Her mother often said she could spend hours outside, finding joy in things adults would overlook: a butterfly resting on a fence, the way puddles reflected the sky, or how the wind made the tall grass dance. That morning, as the countryside began to breathe again, she toddled into the yard bundled in her little blue dress, the hem still damp from where she had stepped too close to the wet grass. Her laughter bubbled in the crisp air as she bent down to pick up small pebbles, lining them carefully on the wooden steps as if they were treasures no one else could see. A sparrow hopped nearby, tilting its head curiously at her giggles, before fluttering away when she clapped her tiny hands. The world around her seemed peaceful, almost enchanted. The storm's scars remained, a broken fence here, a few branches scattered there, but in her eyes, it was simply a playground transformed. She crouched to watch a trail of ants march determinedly across the dirt, then stretched her arms to feel the soft drizzle still dripping from the eaves of the house. Every small thing felt like a story unfolding only for her. Beyond the yard, the woods loomed quietly, their dark shadows contrasting against the sunlit clearing. Most children might have been afraid of the tangled branches and the silence within, but she only saw mystery. Her steps carried her closer, each one leaving small prints on the wet earth, until she stood at the edge where grass gave way to soft moss. She plucked a wild flower, its petals slightly bruised by the storm, and held it up as if it were the most precious crown. It was then, as she twirled with the flower in her hand, that something changed. The morning silence shifted. At first it was subtle, a faint sound carried in the breeze, so soft it almost blended with the rustling leaves. She stopped spinning, her small head tilting to one side. Her brows knit together as her ears caught it again. It wasn't the chirp of a bird, nor the creak of swaying branches. It was different, a sound low and broken. Her little heart skipped. The giggles that had filled the air moments ago now faded into a quiet hush. She clutched the flower tighter, as though it might give her courage. The sound came again, a whimper, thin and trembling, as if carried from far away. She turned her gaze toward the woods, her eyes searching for the source. Curiosity flickered in her like a candle flame, fragile yet determined. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, the damp grass soaking into her shoes. The world seemed to hold its breath with her, every bird pausing, every branch standing still, as if waiting to see what she would do. The sound was clearer now. Not once, but twice. A cry that held both pain and loneliness. She pressed her small hand against her chest, feeling the beat of her own heart. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound escaped. She didn't call for her mother, didn't cry out in fear. Instead, she listened. She listened with every piece of innocence and empathy her tiny body could hold. And in that moment, something inside her changed. The yard that had once been a playground no longer held her attention. The flower she clutched slipped slowly from her hand, landing softly on the wet ground. Her eyes fixed on the forest, drawn by the voice of sorrow that seemed to be begging for someone to hear. She took another step and another. The birds resumed their songs above her, but she didn't notice. The wind brushed her hair against her cheeks, but she didn't care. Every sense was focused on that sound, that fragile cry hidden within the fallen trees. What could it be? Her mind, innocent and untainted by the fears adults might have, didn't think of danger or threat. She only thought of sadness, of someone, or something that needed her. And so, without hesitation, the baby girl followed the sound. The forest felt heavier as the little girl stepped deeper inside. Sunlight struggled to break through the thick branches overhead, and what did slip through landed in thin golden shafts on the wet ground. Every step she took was slow, cautious, as though even the earth beneath her wanted her to tread carefully. The whimpering sound was closer now, more desperate, like someone crying quietly but endlessly, waiting for a miracle. She came upon a massive tree that had been ripped from its roots during the storm. Its trunk lay twisted, hollow in the center, with jagged pieces of bark splintered outward. The ground around it was scarred, mud churned by rain, branches scattered like bones. It looked like the remains of a battle, and inside that hollow darkness, something stirred. Her small eyes widened. From the shadows came a pair of glistening eyes, wet and filled with terror. A low cry escaped, trembling and weak. The girl's breath caught in her throat as she leaned closer, her tiny fingers clutching the rough bark for support. It was a dog. Not just any dog. A large German shepherd, its once proud frame now crumpled inside the tree's broken shell. Its fur was drenched and matted with mud, streaked with blood from cuts along its legs. Its chest heaved with effort, every breath sharp and shallow. And its eyes, they were unlike anything the girl had ever seen. Wide, pleading, rimmed with pain, yet flickering faintly with hope at the sight of her. The dog whimpered again, a sound so fragile it pierced through the silence of the forest like glass breaking. The girl pressed a hand against her mouth, unsure if she should cry or call for help. She had seen dogs before in her little town, friendly ones that wagged their tails when she giggled, but this was different. This was not a dog running to greet her. This was a creature trapped between life and death. Her tiny heart pounded in her chest. Fear crept into her veins. The sheer size of the animal, its sharp teeth partly visible as its mouth opened in a pained pant. For a moment she thought of running. The thought was quick, like a shadow crossing the sun. Run back to her yard. Run back to the safety of her mother's arms. But something inside her stopped her. The way the dog's eyes met hers, not with anger, not with threat, but with a brokenness she didn't understand yet somehow felt. They were eyes that begged. Eyes that whispered, "Don't leave me." She crouched lower, her small knees sinking into the wet moss. Her hands, trembling at first, rested against the tree's edge. The dog pulled back slightly into the hollow, its ears flattening, a soft growl rumbling low in its throat. The girl froze, her breath shallow. For a few long seconds, time itself seemed to hold still, child and animal staring at one another across a fragile line between trust and fear. Then, slowly, the growl faded. The dog blinked, its head lowering onto its muddy paws. Its chest rose and fell with effort, and another whimper slipped out, weaker than before. The girl tilted her head, her lips parting as though she might speak, though no words came. She didn't need them. Instead, she extended one tiny hand, palm open, fingers outstretched. Her hand shook, not from the cold but from the weight of courage she didn't even know she carried. The shepherd's nose twitched. For a moment, it did nothing. Then, cautiously, it inched forward, its nose brushing the air close to her fingers. The girl gasped softly, but didn't pull away. The dog stopped, too exhausted to continue, and let out a sigh that sounded almost human, a release of pain, fear, and surrender. Up close, she could see every detail of his suffering. His fur clumped with dirt, streaked with scratches. One paw bent awkwardly beneath the heavy weight of the tree's fallen branch. His body shivered slightly, as if the storm's cold still clung to him. Each time he tried to shift, a wince crossed his face, followed by another soft cry that made her chest ache. Tears welled in her eyes, though she didn't quite understand why. Perhaps it was because she had never seen something so strong look so helpless. Or perhaps it was because, in her innocence, she felt the dog's pain as if it were her own. Her gaze darted toward the open field where her house stood, far in the distance. She could turn back, run for help, leave the dog behind. But as she looked once more into those pleading eyes, the thought of leaving felt impossible. Something inside told her she had to stay, that her presence, no matter how small, mattered to him. Her tiny voice, soft and trembling, finally broke the silence. "It's okay," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't understand her words. But perhaps he understood her tone, for the dog's ears twitched and his breathing steadied just slightly. The forest, once so heavy with silence, now seemed alive with the quiet bond forming between them. A baby girl, too young to understand fear fully, and a wounded German shepherd, too broken to believe in hope, both caught in a moment that would change everything. The question now lingered in the air, heavy and unanswered. Would she run for safety, or would she choose the impossible task her heart had already accepted, to help save him? The little girl remained crouched beside the fallen tree, her tiny knees pressed into the damp moss. The German shepherd's trembling eyes never left hers, and though her small body quivered with uncertainty, she stayed. Something inside her refused to let go. She tilted her head again, just like children do when they don't understand the world but desperately want to. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, and she whispered softly, her words fragile in the heavy stillness of the woods. "It's okay, don't be scared." Her voice was no louder than a bird's song, but it carried a kind of purity the forest hadn't heard in days. The shepherd's ears flicked at the sound. For a heartbeat, the animal's chest seemed to pause mid-breath. He didn't growl this time. He only blinked, as if unsure what to make of the tiny figure before him. The girl stretched her small hand again, palm open, closer now. Her fingers brushed against the rough bark, then paused just inches from his snout. The shepherd shifted, his nose twitching at her scent. His eyes, still rimmed with pain, softened ever so slightly. It was the first spark of trust. The dog let out a low whine, not the sharp cry of fear she had first heard, but something gentler, almost like a sigh. Encouraged, she leaned closer, her dress brushing against the mud, her tiny hands daring to rest on the bark near his paw. The shepherd didn't pull away this time. He stayed still, as though testing the possibility of hope. The girl giggled quietly, the sound innocent and sweet. To her, it was a game of bravery, to see if the big doggy would let her come near. To him, it was salvation, a gentle reminder that not every presence in the world meant pain. For several moments, they simply looked at one another. Her eyes, wide and full of wonder, met his, broken yet searching. And somehow, in that fragile silence, they understood something words could never explain. But then, as quickly as the bond began, reality returned. The girl noticed the way his paw was trapped under a heavy branch, the awkward angle of his leg. She saw the mud caked into his fur, the wounds seeping slowly. Her small face scrunched with worry. She knew he needed more than her whispers and touches. So she stood up abruptly, brushing her hands against her dress. The shepherd's ears perked, his body stiffening as though afraid she would leave. But the girl turned and ran, not away from him, but toward home. Her little legs moved as fast as they could, splashing through puddles, her breath puffing in the cool air. The house came into view, and she rushed inside, her cheeks flushed. She didn't have the words to tell her mother what she had seen. Instead, she darted to the corner of the room where her favorite blanket lay folded, a soft, faded cloth that smelled like home. She hugged it to her chest, then grabbed a small plastic cup of water from the table. On her way out, her eyes fell on her toy box. She reached in and pulled out a stuffed bear with one button eye missing. Arms full, she hurried back to the woods. The branches scratched against her arms, but she didn't stop. The cries guided her, pulling her like a compass toward the fallen tree. When she arrived, the shepherd's head lifted weakly, his ears twitching. He whined softly, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. The girl dropped to her knees beside him and spread the blanket gently over his trembling body. It was clumsy, far too small to cover him fully, but it was warm. And it was hers, her treasure, her comfort, and now she was offering it to him. The shepherd's breathing slowed. His eyes blinked as the fabric settled over his back, as though he couldn't believe someone cared enough to shield him from the cold. She placed the cup of water near his nose, spilling half of it in the process. He sniffed cautiously, then lapped at it weakly, his tongue trembling with every sip. The girl clapped her hands softly, a giggle escaping her lips at the sight of him drinking. Finally, she placed the stuffed bear beside his paw. "Here," she whispered, her voice tender. "You can have him." The shepherd blinked again. He didn't touch the toy, but the gesture seemed to reach deeper than anything else. It wasn't water. It wasn't warmth. It was something more, an offering of trust, a bond sealed in the simplest act of sharing. For the first time since the storm, the German shepherd closed his eyes not in pain, but in fragile rest. His chest rose and fell more evenly, his body no longer as tense. The growls had ceased. The cries were fewer. The little girl, too, seemed calmer. She lay on her stomach beside him, her chin resting in her hands, humming a tune only children could invent. Her voice filled the woods with a melody that carried no fear, only kindness. And so, in the heart of a forest scarred by chaos, something extraordinary happened. Innocence became strength. The dog, once guarded and broken, surrendered to the safety of a child's compassion. And the child, too young to know the weight of bravery, became the hero he had needed all along. It was only the beginning, a flicker of connection that would soon grow into something unshakable. But in that moment, under the shadow of a fallen tree, two souls met on equal ground, one too small to understand fear, and one too wounded to believe in hope. Together they found both. The fallen forest still carried the silence of destruction, broken only by the faint whimpers of the trapped German shepherd. The baby girl had tried everything her small body could manage. She had whispered to him, draped her blanket over his trembling body, and even brought him water to soothe his thirst. But the heavy branch that crushed his paw was too strong, too stubborn to move. Her little hands pushed and pushed, her face turning red from the effort, but the tree did not even shiver beneath her touch. Her arms ached, her breath came in short bursts, and finally she slumped to the ground, tears filling her wide eyes. She looked at the dog, who stared back at her with a mixture of pain and trust, as though he was silently pleading for her not to give up. That look ignited something deep inside her, a realization that she could not save him alone. She stood suddenly, determination lighting up her small face. With muddy shoes and tangled hair, she darted out of the woods and back toward the clearing. Her little legs carried her as fast as they could, splashing through puddles, slipping once but never stopping. Her mother, standing outside and folding laundry, frowned in confusion at the sight of her daughter racing across the yard. The girl didn't stop to explain. Instead, she tugged frantically at her mother's skirt, pointing toward the forest. "Help," she stammered in her broken voice. Her mother's heart lurched at the desperation in those words, and without another question she dropped everything and followed. As they hurried across the grass, the mother shouted for the neighbors, her voice carrying urgency. Curtains rustled, doors opened, and soon several townsfolk followed them toward the forest. When they arrived at the fallen tree, the sight that greeted them left every heart aching. The dog lay trapped in the hollow trunk, his fur soaked in mud and his body trembling with exhaustion. His paw was crushed under the heavy branch, blood staining the ground beneath him. And beside him knelt the little girl, patting his head gently, whispering comfort in a language only innocence could speak. The neighbors exchanged glances. Their expressions shifted from confusion to determination. One of the men crouched near the tree, his hands brushing over the thick branch. "We'll need several hands," he muttered grimly. Another neighbor fetched a rope, and soon the small crowd organized itself around the fallen trunk. The girl never moved from the shepherd's side. She held his gaze, smoothing her blanket against him as if to remind him that he wasn't alone. When the men counted down to lift, she pressed her tiny forehead against the dog's, whispering, "Don't be scared. They're helping now." The first attempt filled the forest with the sound of straining voices and groaning wood. The branch shifted but slammed back into place, and the shepherd cried out in pain. The girl flinched but kept whispering, her soft tone wrapping around him like a shield. It's okay," she repeated, her voice shaking but steady enough to calm him. The second attempt began. This time the branch lifted higher, ropes pulling, muscles tightening, and sweat dripping from foreheads. A woman quickly slid a smaller log beneath to wedge the branch open. The shepherd whimpered as his paw twisted slightly, but the girl's tiny hand stayed on his head, and somehow he stayed calm. Finally, with a thunderous crack, the branch lifted high enough for two men to reach inside and slide his leg free. The dog let out a cry that rang through the forest, a mixture of agony and relief, before collapsing fully onto the blanket. For a moment, no one moved. Then one voice shouted, "He's out!" and a wave of relief washed over the group. The baby girl clapped her muddy hands once, her face breaking into a tear-streaked smile. She bent down quickly, stroking the dog's head as his breathing came in short, heavy bursts. His body trembled, but he no longer looked trapped. His head rested weakly in her lap, his eyes closing as though, for the first time since the storm, he could finally rest. The crowd of neighbors exhaled together, some wiping their brows, others shaking their heads at the unlikely sight, a child so small leading them all to an act of compassion. Her mother pulled her close, her arms wrapping protectively around her, but the girl's focus never left the shepherd. She giggled softly, her tears still wet, and whispered, "See, you're safe now." And as if he understood, the dog's tail thumped once weakly against the ground before going still again. The neighbors began to talk of calling the vet, fetching food, and bringing warm towels. But for the little girl, nothing else mattered. She had looked into the eyes of suffering and chosen not to run away. Her courage had lit the path for everyone else. In that forest clearing, surrounded by broken branches and muddy footprints, something extraordinary had happened. Innocence had led the way, and strength had followed. The storm had left scars across the countryside, tearing down trees, shattering fences, and frightening the town. But out of its destruction, a new story was born. A story of a child's courage, of neighbors uniting, and of a German shepherd who found freedom because one small heart refused to give up. The forest clearing slowly began to settle after the dramatic rescue. The heavy branch lay pushed aside, ropes dangled loosely from the hands that had pulled with all their might, and the damp air seemed to breathe easier, as though even nature itself sighed in relief. The German shepherd now rested fully on the blanket the little girl had brought, his chest rising and falling in exhausted rhythm. His body was weak, his paw badly injured, but his eyes no longer held the same panic. They were tired, but softer, calmer, as if they finally believed the nightmare was over. The baby girl sat cross-legged beside him, her tiny hands still stroking his muddy fur. Her dress was smeared with dirt, her hair tangled and wet, but she didn't care. She looked at him the way a child looks at a new friend, not with pity, not with fear, but with unshakable loyalty. Every time he twitched or whimpered, she leaned closer and whispered, "It's okay. You're safe now." And somehow, her little voice had more power to soothe him than anything else. It was then that one of the neighbors, kneeling nearby, noticed something beneath the mud and matted fur. "Hold on," he said, reaching gently toward the shepherd's neck. The dog stiffened slightly, but the girl placed her hand on his head, and he relaxed again, allowing the stranger to touch him. Carefully, the man brushed away the clumps of dirt until a faint glimmer of metal appeared. A collar. The man squinted, lifting the tag into the light. The engravings were worn and scratched, dulled by weather and time, but a name was still barely visible. He rubbed it with his thumb, clearing more mud until the letters shone through. Max. A murmur swept through the crowd. Max? Someone repeated softly. Another neighbor's eyes widened. Wait, could it be? That family at the edge of town. Didn't they lose a dog during the storm? Heads turned, whispers spread. The storm had been fierce, flooding roads, breaking fences, scattering livestock and pets alike. Everyone remembered the chaos, the desperate searches for missing animals. Some had returned. Others hadn't. I heard they'd been searching for days, another voice added. They thought he was gone. The realization hit like a wave. This wasn't just a stray. This was someone's beloved companion, lost in the storm and hidden all this time beneath the fallen tree. The air grew heavy with emotion as people exchanged glances, their eyes glistening. Word traveled quickly. A teenager pulled out his phone and called the family. Minutes later, as the neighbors still surrounded the shepherd, a car came rushing down the dirt road, skidding to a stop near the clearing. The doors flew open and a man and woman stumbled out, their faces etched with panic and hope. "Max!" the woman cried, her voice breaking. She ran forward, her shoes slipping in the mud, and fell to her knees beside the dog. The shepherd lifted his head weakly, his ears twitching at the sound of her voice. His tail thumped faintly against the ground, once, twice, before he whimpered softly. Tears streamed down the woman's face as she cradled his head in her trembling hands. The man knelt beside her, his own eyes wet as he stroked the dog's neck, whispering, "You're home, boy. You're home." The crowd stood in silence, many wiping their own tears at the rawness of the reunion. The shepherd, who had seemed so close to giving up, found the strength to nuzzle into his family's touch. His body shook with emotion, his eyes shining with recognition and relief. Through it all, the baby girl remained by his side. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she smiled as the dog wagged his tail, his gaze darting between her and the people who now held him close. For a moment, it was as if Max himself wanted to say, "She saved me. Don't forget her." The woman looked up through her tears and saw the child, her tiny dress stained and her hands still resting protectively on the dog's back. Emotion caught in her throat as she reached out, pulling the little girl into a hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're his angel." The neighbors nodded, murmuring agreement. Some even clapped softly, not out of celebration, but in reverence for the smallest hero among them. In that moment, everyone knew that if it hadn't been for the courage of a 3-year-old girl, Max would never have been found. The man stood and addressed the group, his voice thick with gratitude. "We searched everywhere. We thought the storm had taken him from us forever. But she—" He paused, glancing at the child, who blinked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "She brought him back." From that day on, word spread quickly through the town. The story of the baby girl who had heard the cries no one else had noticed, who had crawled into the mud and refused to give up, who had led her entire community into a rescue. It became a tale people whispered with admiration. She was no longer just a little girl playing near the woods. She was the town's hero, the one who had saved Max. That night, as the stars shone above the quiet countryside, the girl lay asleep in her bed, her blanket freshly washed but carrying the faint smell of the dog she had comforted. And somewhere nearby, Max rested in his family's home, his wounds being treated, his body healing. But his heart already belonged partly to the child who had heard his cries when no one else could. The storm had tried to take him, but innocence had given him back. And in that truth, the entire town found a reason to believe once again in the power of compassion, in the strength of small hands, and in the miracle of a bond born in the darkest of hours. The days that followed the rescue brought a new rhythm to the small countryside town. After Max was freed from the fallen tree, the neighbors acted quickly. A local vet was called, and within the hour, the German Shepherd was gently lifted into the back of a truck, wrapped in the same blanket the little girl had given him. She sat beside him during the ride, her tiny hand resting on his head as if to remind him that he was not alone. At the clinic, the vet examined him with careful hands. His paw was swollen and bruised from being pinned, several scratches lined his legs, and he was dangerously dehydrated. But the vet shook his head with wonder. "It's a miracle he survived," he said softly. "If it hadn't been for her—" He didn't finish the sentence, but every adult in the room knew what he meant. The little girl, oblivious to the weight of those words, giggled when Max tried to lick her hand despite his weakness. "See, he likes me," she said proudly, her cheeks glowing. The shepherd's tail gave a faint wag, and that was enough to make everyone smile through their tears. In the following weeks, Max began to heal under the community's care. Neighbors took turns bringing food, offering blankets, and checking on his progress. His family, overwhelmed with gratitude, never stopped thanking the little girl and her parents. But no matter how many hands helped, there was one presence Max sought above all: the tiny child who had first heard his cries. Wherever she went, Max's eyes followed. When she toddled through the garden, he limped behind her, careful not to let her out of sight. When she sat in the grass to play with her toys, he lay nearby, his head resting on his paws, content just to watch. And when she laughed, a sound as pure as sunlight, Max seemed to perk up as if her joy was medicine stronger than anything the vet had given him. The bond between them deepened quickly, becoming something unexplainable. For the girl, Max wasn't just a dog. He was her guardian, her shadow, her constant companion. She would toddle toward him with a piece of bread in her small hand, and though he had once been a powerful protector of his family, now he accepted food from her as gently as if she were royalty. Sometimes she would sit in front of him with her cup of milk, holding it out clumsily, and he would nuzzle her cheek instead of drinking, as though to say her company was nourishment enough. Their playtime became the heart of the neighborhood. Neighbors often paused in their chores just to watch them together, the little girl tossing a ball only half as far as her own arm could manage, and Max dutifully retrieving it, even if it meant simply nudging it back to her feet. The townsfolk would smile, their eyes soft with emotion. "Look at that," someone would whisper. "She saved him, and now he's devoted to her." The German Shepherd's loyalty became legendary. If the girl wandered too close to the woods, Max barked gently, circling her until she turned back. If she sat down in the grass, he lay beside her, his body a living wall of protection. And if a stranger passed too close, his eyes sharpened, his body stiffened, not with aggression, but with a warning that this child was not to be harmed. Her parents, at first nervous about such a large dog shadowing their baby, soon realized the truth: she was safer with him than without. There was no fear in their daughter's eyes when she touched his muzzle or leaned against his fur. Only trust, only love. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a gentle shade of pink, the little girl wandered out into the yard with her blanket tucked under her arm. Max lay stretched on the porch, his eyes half closed in contentment. She toddled over and draped the blanket across his back, patting it carefully as though tucking him into bed. "There," she whispered with satisfaction. "Now you're warm." The shepherd lifted his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers. Then he let out a long, peaceful sigh, his body relaxing completely under her touch. The neighbors who happened to witness the scene wiped at their eyes quietly, none daring to break the fragile beauty of the moment. It was a reversal so symbolic that it touched every heart. Once, she had given him that blanket when he was broken and trapped, and now she gave it again, not out of pity, but out of love. The town embraced the pair as symbols of hope. Parents told their children the story: teaching them that kindness could save lives. Elders repeated it by firelight, marveling at how the smallest soul among them had sparked the courage of an entire community. The little girl became known not just as the child who found Max, but as the one who reminded them all what compassion truly meant. For Max, healing was more than physical. Yes, his paw grew stronger, his fur regained its shine, and his body filled out again with good food and care. But the deeper healing came from the laughter of the child he followed, from the warmth of her small hands on his head, from the blanket she insisted on sharing with him every night. And for her, the healing came in the form of a friend, not a toy, not a game, but a living companion who walked beside her, listened to her babble, and stood guard over her fragile world. Together, they were more than child and dog. They were survivors. They were family. The storm had tested them both, tearing one from his home and thrusting the other into courage far beyond her years. But in the calm after the chaos, they found each other. And in that bond, they found something stronger than fear, stronger than pain. They found love that asked for nothing but gave everything in return. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. But the story of the little girl and the German shepherd lingered in the town like a song that refused to fade. People still spoke about the storm, about the damage it had caused, about the things it had stolen. But more often, they spoke about what it had given back. Out of broken branches and flooded fields, it had planted a tale of courage that no one could forget. The image of a toddler, barely old enough to speak in full sentences, crawling through mud to comfort a dog twice her size had become a story told at every gathering. Families repeated it around dinner tables, neighbors recounted it to visitors, and parents told their children before bedtime. And in every version, the moral remained the same. Innocence has a power adults often underestimate. It does not see danger the way older eyes do, nor calculate risks with logic. Instead, it sees pain, and it answers with compassion. That was all it had taken. A little girl's refusal to walk away from a cry in the forest, to save a life. Max, the German shepherd, became more than just a dog in their eyes. He became a living symbol. When he limped through the town alongside the little girl, people paused in their work to watch. His scars were still visible, a reminder of the storm and the tree that had trapped him, but so was his loyalty. He never strayed far from the child who had saved him. His eyes, once clouded with fear, now carried a steady warmth, as though he had finally found his purpose again. To the town, he was not just Max anymore. He was survival, loyalty, and trust embodied. And the little girl, her role could not be denied. She didn't understand the weight of her actions the way adults did. To her, Max was simply her friend. She would laugh when he nudged her hand for food, squeal when he ran clumsily after her ball, and giggle when he tried to climb onto the porch where she sat cross-legged with her toys. She never called herself brave, nor thought herself extraordinary. She was just being herself, a child who loved, a child who listened, a child who cared. But for the people who witnessed it, her courage was a revelation. She had reminded them of something simple yet profound. Compassion is not measured by age or strength. Sometimes, the smallest hands make the biggest difference. The town carried that lesson forward. When storms came again, neighbors didn't wait to see who needed help. They went looking. When someone cried out, even faintly, they listened more closely, remembering how one child had heard what no one else had. And when doubt crept in about whether kindness mattered in a world so full of hardship, they recalled the story of the baby girl and the shepherd, and their hearts softened. One evening, under a sky painted in shades of orange and purple, the little girl carried her blanket into the yard. Max followed her, his steps steady now, though his limp remained. She laid the blanket on the grass and sat down, patting the space beside her. The shepherd lowered himself onto it, resting his head on her lap as she hummed softly, the same tune she had once sung to him beneath the fallen tree. To anyone passing by, it looked simple, a child and her dog sharing a quiet moment. But for those who knew the story, it was sacred. Her parents stood on the porch, watching quietly. Her mother whispered, "She doesn't even know how much she's changed all of us." Her father nodded, his eyes fixed on the pair. "Maybe that's the beauty of it," he said. "She didn't do it to be a hero. She did it because she couldn't do anything else." In the end, that was the truth of it. Bravery had not come from strength. It had not come from knowledge or experience or planning. It had come from something much purer, a refusal to ignore suffering. A child's instinct to comfort, to help, to reach out even when her hands were too small to move a tree. Max closed his eyes, letting out a long sigh, and the little girl covered him once again with her blanket. The same blanket that had been her treasure, the one she had offered when he lay broken, the one she continued to share because, to her, love meant giving. That simple gesture said more than words ever could. "I am here. I will protect you now, the way you once needed me to." For those who heard the story, near and far, the lesson was clear. Innocence is not weakness. Compassion is not fragility. And the bonds we form in moments of pain often become the strongest ties of all. As the seasons changed and the town rebuilt fully from the storm's damage, the story only grew. Travelers passing through heard it from locals. Children acted it out in their play, one pretending to cry like Max, another pretending to rescue him with a blanket. And the adults, who had once been hardened by life's endless trials, found themselves humbled by the reminder that kindness could come from the unlikeliest of places. The storm had broken fences, torn roofs, and flooded fields. But it had also given them a gift. It had shown them that even when the world seems cruel, when trees fall and skies darken, compassion can still shine through, sometimes from the smallest voice, sometimes from the tiniest hands. And perhaps that is why the story resonated so deeply. Because in every heart, no matter how old, there is still a longing to believe in that kind of loyalty, in that kind of love, in that kind of miracle. So if this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Share it with someone who still believes in loyalty that never fades. Share it with someone who needs reminding that innocence can move mountains, that compassion can heal wounds, that sometimes the smallest hands really do make the biggest difference.